pleased to introduce our next speaker, who really needs no introduction, Dr. David Holmes, who will be speaking to us on the STS ACC TVT Registry and some lessons learned with regard to our topic.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Lucille. It's great to be here to talk about some of the issues as it relates to registries and then TAVR and how they fit together. It has been said that indeed the TVT Registry is the poster child of registries going forward. I don't have any relationships related to this, but as we think about this poster child registry, what lessons could we learn? This is the sort of classic thing that we went to in high school and in college where somebody put all this stuff on the backboard and you didn't understand what it meant. Well, let's then talk about the lessons that we might have learned from this field. The lessons learned could be in different categories. We could talk about what is needed to learn those lessons. We could talk about what have we learned. We could talk about how can we use what we have learned, and we could talk about then what are the issues. And I'll talk about each of those a little bit in turn. What is needed for all of this new technology that comes along? There's going to be emphasis on national registries. What do you need to have for a national registry? Well, you need to incorporate the stakeholders, and Sushil talked about the stakeholders. You need carrots and sticks. That's a really important thing. You need standardization in the definitions, and then you need professional society buy-in. Let's talk about some of these specific issues in terms of setting up a national registry, and that's going to be used for all upcoming new technology. These are the partners, and again, Sushil talked about the partners. The essential part of this on all of these is that the patient is there, and that is the crucial part of it. But all of the stakeholders need to be kept in mind as we set up these registries. The next piece of information that's incredibly important is the carrot versus the stick. What do we know about carrots and sticks in setting up registries? Well, it's incredibly important to have carrots. It's also pretty darn important to have sticks. What are those carrots and sticks? Well, this is the stick. This is the big stick that CMS comes along and says TAVR will be covered for the treatment if indeed there are two cardiac surgeons, if the patient is under the care of a heart team, and all the other things. The stick is that indeed, if you as an institution are providing TAVR and you don't meet these CMS requirements for reimbursement, you might be on your own. And that is a huge stick. So for all registries going forward, we should keep that stick in mind, as well as the carrot involved with that. The next piece of information about registries is this. We've all gone on trips. You've gone with your kids, and each kid wants to take something specific. They say, oh, Mom and Dad, I just want this one thing. I got to have it. I've got to have it. Well, in national registries, everybody has to have their own specific thing, whether it's all people that are red-haired, or maybe people that are 6'9", or maybe people that are 3'2". But at the very end of the day, you are overwhelmed. Your station wagon, your car is overwhelmed with data. And in the TVT registry, it's more than 400 pieces of data that somebody fills out because somebody said, oh, I got to have that. Got to have that. And that's an important consideration for the design of registries. What have we learned from it? We have seen this slide from Sushil, that we can then follow the practice of this specific therapy over the course of time from 2012 to 2016, and we can see what happens in the field with SAVR and with TAVR. And we can then recapitulate some of the pieces of information that we learned from the Gary Registry about the dominance of this technology. We can learn terribly important things in terms of benchmark. If you, wherever you work, have not seen a reduction in length of stay along with these sort of national benchmarks, then you've got to rethink your processes, because we can see that the length of stay continues to decline from 5 or 6 down to 3, and it will come down to 2. And if your institution using that information has not playing in that same ballpark, then you need to make some changes. We can say, well, we're using it in younger and younger patients, and that is true, and so Sheil talked about that, but they're not all that much younger. I guess maybe if you're 82, you think of somebody who's 84 as being really old. Really old. Well, we're still doing pretty darn old patients. Given as I get closer to that, somebody that's 82 is looking like a spring chicken. What else do we know? We know that we now do this with transfemoral access. If your institution isn't doing transfemoral access in almost every patient, then you're behind the time. And that will be part of a quality metric for sure. We also know that we can follow trends, and so Sheil talked about we're doing it in different patients. This happens to be elective valve and valve procedures that started out at less than 2% because it wasn't approved. Now it's 7% and continues to climb, and Danny will talk about that. We can then say, well, how about the issue of vascular complications? Terribly important, and you and your institution need to track those vascular complications. And what are you going to compare them to? You're going to compare them to the national benchmark data. And we can see that life-threatening bleeding has gone from 7 down to 2.4%. Major vascular complications, about the same, 1.5%. But that's a benchmark that you and your institution need to be aware of to make sure that your practice is good, that your outcomes are good. Along with this, we can have some assurance as we talk with this group of patients that the frequency of mortality is less. Stroke is also decreasing, but it's not zero, and we'll hear about that. And finally, a piece of information is in terms of sending the patients out, we need to make sure that the majority of our patients are able to go home. That's part of the Class C group of patients, and you should meet those benchmark data. What can we do with the data? Well, we could expand indications. So we've talked about what the data is. We could say, what could we use that data for? And so expanding the indications would be terribly important, and that has happened. The FDA looks at data from the TVT Registry and other registry pieces of information to say, gosh, things are looking pretty good for valve and valve. We will now approve it for that. Didn't used to be, but we will now approve it for that. That means we can open up the patient groups that can benefit from this technology. Or we can use it to make models for outcome. These are just from the TVT Registry: in-hospital risk for adjusted mortality, in-hospital mortality patient risk score, not just the in-hospital risk score, but the patient risk score, and then the in-hospital stroke score. And we'll be able to have curves like this. And you can say where your hospital, where you fall in this bell-shaped curve. Are you right smack dab in the center? Are you a little bit worse and maybe you're doing something wrong? Are you a little bit better? Well, keep it up. But you'll have that information. How about going forward? What are going to be the issues? Is there going to be public reporting? How are we going to sustain these registries that are so important because they're incredibly expensive? And so these are all issues going forward with all of the registries that we participate in, that we believe in. We're going to need to have continued CED. We're going to need to have continued industry support. We're going to need to have continued site support. Your sites have to be involved in this process going forward. And so what have we learned? What is needed? What have we found? What can we use? What are the issues? Going forward, registries are incredibly important. Science tells us what we can do. Guideline tells us what we should do. But registries are the bottom line of what we're doing. And they are essential pieces of information for identifying, indeed, just that, what you and I do every single day. Thank you.